The crack of antique platinum isn't loud, just a clean, definitive snap. But on that perfect Sunday morning, it sounded like a gunshot across the manicured patio. My 16-year-old niece, Chloe, didn't even look at me. Her attention was completely absorbed by the live stream on her phone. She just snatched the vintage bracelet from my wrist, holding it up to her camera and declaring it, "Grandma core garbage." When it didn't slide over her hand, she didn't bother with the clasp. She just yanked. The delicate safety chain, with 80 years of history woven into its links, sheared off. The pieces clattered onto the stone tiles like broken promises. My brother, Mark, simply sipped his mimosa. His wife, Serena, didn't glance up from adjusting her ring light. Chloe just giggled. Oops. Ugly anyway. No one moved. No one apologized. In their world, it was just old jewelry. They didn't know it was the literal reason the roof over their heads hadn't been reclaimed by the bank. They didn't know it was a direct line to the founder of the very institution that defined their daughter's identity. And they certainly didn't know that with that single careless pull, Chloe had just shredded her own future. Before we see exactly how much that moment cost her, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from right now. I knelt on the cold stone, the morning dew seeping through the fabric of my trousers. The platinum fragments felt unnaturally heavy in my palm, a dead weight where a living pulse of history used to be. Above me, the performance of a perfect family brunch continued without missing a beat. Serena was now angling her phone, complaining that the natural light was casting unflattering shadows. Mark was topping up champagne flutes, his laugh a touch too hearty at a joke we'd all heard 100 times before. He was playing the part of the successful provider, the patriarch of this beautiful stage set. And what a set it was. The sprawling garden, meticulously landscaped. The imported marble countertops visible through the sliding doors. The lease on the luxury SUV glinting in the driveway. It was all a magnificent production, a carefully curated illusion of affluence. The funding for this theater? Maxed out credit cards, second mortgages they never discussed, and a series of silent, urgent bailouts they never acknowledged. I was the unseen stage manager, the one who made sure the lights never went out. Elara, the family archivist. To them, I was the spinster aunt with sensible shoes and a 6-year-old sedan, a woman who spent her days in the silent, dusty halls of a museum. I was tolerated because I was useful. I was the emergency contact, the tax time advisor, the quiet problem solver. Standing up, I slid the broken metal into the pocket of my cardigan. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the laden table. A younger version of me, the one who still craved their approval, would have dissolved into tears, desperately trying to make them understand the sentimental value of what had just been destroyed. But the woman standing on that patio felt something else entirely. It was a cold, clinical clarity, washing over me like an ice bath. 4 years, I had tortured myself with questions. Why did I stay? Why did I anonymously pay their property taxes when the foreclosure notices arrived? Why did I fund their necessary wellness retreats to Tuscany? Why had I, for 3 years running, quietly wired $55,000 a year to the prestigious Aurelian Arts Academy to cover Chloe's elite cello tuition? All while they mocked my frugality, my drab wardrobe, my lack of a glamorous life. I used to call it love. I used to tell myself I was the glue, the stable center that held our fragile family constellation together. But as I watched Serena, who was now undoubtedly editing the footage of my humiliation to post as a casual family moment on her feed, the truth crystallized. It wasn't love. It wasn't even kindness. It was the invisible, self-forged chain of the perpetual savior. When you grow up as the fixer, the reliable one in the chaos, you begin to believe your only value is transactional. Your worth is tied directly to your utility. You come to believe that love is something you must earn through sacrifice. Pay the bill, earn affection, solve the crisis, gain respect. You willingly wear this heavy chain because the terrifying alternative is the thought that without it, you are nothing, you are invisible. It is a prison you build for yourself, brick by brick, check by check. I had spent 32 years believing that if I just endured enough disrespect, if I just gave enough, I would eventually earn a permanent, honored seat at their table. I thought my silence was dignified. I thought my invisible support was noble. But looking at Chloe, who had already moved on, bored, scrolling through TikTok on her phone, I realized with devastating simplicity, I had not been noble. I had been an enabler. I had meticulously trained them to view me as a natural resource to be mined, not a person to be respected. In their eyes, I wasn't a sister, an aunt, a woman with her own dreams and hurts. I was an appliance. A reliable, quiet, funding appliance. And when an appliance breaks, you don't apologize to it. You kick it out of frustration and call for a replacement. Serena finally deigned to glance my way, waving a perfectly manicured hand in a dismissive flutter. Oh, Elara, don't look so tragic. It looked ancient anyway. You can probably get a few hundred for the scrap metal at one of those pawn shops downtown. I held her gaze. I looked past her at the house my money had saved from auction. I looked at the child my money was educating at a world-class institution. The heavy, familiar chain around my neck, the one I'd carried for decades, didn't snap. It simply dissolved, as if it had never been more than a mirage. I'm leaving, I said. My voice was quiet, steady, barely audible over the bland acoustic playlist streaming from their outdoor speaker. All right, see you Thursday. Don't forget you're on cake duty for Dad's birthday thing at the club. I walked through the open sliding doors, my footsteps silent on the polished floor. I passed the kitchen island, knowing the drawer filled with unpaid bills was just beneath the fruit bowl. I walked out the heavy front door and into the startling normality of the afternoon. I got into my sensible sedan. I didn't slam the door. I closed it with a gentle, definitive click. The silence inside the car was immense, but for the first time, it wasn't empty. It was the sound of a contract reaching its final clause. The drive home was a blur of asphalt and adrenaline. I didn't speed. I didn't run a single yellow light. I drove with the terrifying, precise calm of someone who has just realized they are holding the detonator to a life they built but never truly owned. My apartment welcomed me with a familiar, comforting silence, scented with old paper, lemonwood polish, and the faint, dry aroma of history preserved. It was a sharp, cleansing contrast to the cloying perfume of Serena's garden party flowers. I set my keys in the ceramic dish by the door, the clink echoing in the stillness. Methodically, I filled the kettle, selecting a bag of strong Earl Grey tea. I watched the steam rise in a slender, twisting column, my hands perfectly steady on the countertop. There was no tremor, no sick feeling in my stomach, just that same chilling, expansive clarity. I carried the steaming mug to my small, orderly desk nestled between towering stacks of archival boxes. This was my true domain. Quiet, organized, and, as I was finally allowing myself to acknowledge, secretly, astronomically expensive. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, a rectangle of cool light in the dusky room. My first login was to my banking portal. Then, I opened a blank spreadsheet. I titled it, without flourish, The Reckoning. For the first time in over a decade, I began to transcribe the phantom numbers I had carried in my head, the hidden ledger of our family's false economy. I typed them slowly, watching each figure materialize on the screen, giving tangible form to a lifetime of invisible subsidies. The bridge loan for Mark's first failed startup, which he called a sure thing, $42,000. The investment in Serena's short-lived influencer boutique, which folded in 6 months, $25,000. The down payment on their current showcase home, the one with the patio where my bracelet had just died, a transaction listed as a family gift so they could qualify for the mortgage, $80,000. I kept typing. The property tax bailout 2 years ago, $18,500. The emergency family vacation to Switzerland when Mark was burned out, $15,000. The total, even just from this cursory list, was staggering. It was a number that could have bought a home, funded years of travel, secured a future of true independence. Instead, it had purchased their performance. They swan through life like minor aristocracy, posting curated images of their luxury, pitying my sensible shoes and my used car. But their entire kingdom, every brick and piece of imported tile, was built on a foundation of my money, my deferred dreams, my silence. It was the ultimate illusion of power, the confidence of the emptily wealthy. They believed that spending money was power. They thought that conspicuous consumption made them important. But I saw it now, with diamond-cut sharpness. Real power isn't about what you spend. It's about what you control. And I, a Larabelle, quiet archivist of other people's pasts, controlled everything. I closed the banking tab and opened a new browser window, navigating to the donor portal of the Aurelian Arts Academy. My login was not a name but a string of numbers, an identity known only to the chair of the finance committee. I clicked through to the active scholarship management page. And there it was, displayed in sleek, sans serif type. Asterisk the Chloe R. Artistic Merit Grant. Annual disbursement. $55,000. Status. Active. Funding source. Anonymous benefactor star. I had established it 3 years ago, when Chloe's raw talent on the cello first became impossible to ignore. I'd wanted her to have the opportunities one never had. The master classes, the finest instruments, the doors that only a place like Aurelian could open. I had wanted, with a desperate hidden hope, to believe that such a grand, selfless act would finally make them see me, that the magnitude of the gift would translate into a magnitude of respect. They never saw the donor. They only saw the privilege. They assumed the money came from the school's endowment, from a vague patron of the arts, from the universe itself rewarding their inherent specialness. It never once crossed their minds to question how a student with mediocre academic grades and an increasingly entitled attitude had secured one of the Academy's most prestigious and competitive full-ride grants. My eyes drifted to the 2 largest pieces of the bracelet, sitting beside my mousepad. The jeweler's appraisal years ago had pegged its insured value at around $21,000. But its true worth was never in its weight in precious metal. It was in its story, in the hands it had passed through, in the love it symbolized. It was an artifact of resilience that had survived a world war, multiple moves across continents, only to meet its end by the careless hands of a teenager who believed value was measured in viral likes and brand names. 3 years of tuition for Chloe. Asterisk $165,000. The bracelet, a piece of my grandmother's soul. $21,000. The math was simple, brutal, and illuminating. They had destroyed something priceless to me because, in their calculus, I was cheap. I was the aunt who couldn't afford nice things. The staggering irony was that I couldn't afford nice things because I was single-handedly funding asterisk their extravagant performance of a life. My cursor hovered over the button labeled asterisk, cancel recurring grant funding. Asterisk I felt no surge of guilt, no pang of sorrow. I felt only the cold, satisfying final weight of a balance sheet reaching its logical, long-overdue conclusion. I clicked. A confirmation dialog box popped up, stark and serious. Asterisk warning. This action is immediate and irreversible. Revoking this grant may affect the student's enrollment status. Confirm. Asterisk. I didn't hesitate. I clicked asterisk. Yes. Asterisk. The screen refreshed. The status next to Chloe's name shifted from vibrant green active to a dull, gray asterisk terminated. Asterisk. I leaned back in my chair, the old wood creaking softly. I took a sip of my tea. It was still perfectly warm. The silence in my apartment was no longer just the absence of noise. It had texture, weight, value. It was the sound of $165,000 a year staying right where it belonged. It was the sound of a chain being unlocked, not with a key, but with a click. The first tremor in their perfect world hit at 9:17 a.m. on Monday. My phone vibrated on my desk at the museum, cutting through the profound quiet of the archival reading room. The screen flashed. Serena. She never called on Mondays. Mondays were for her content creation, for planning her week of aspirational posts. A detached curiosity settled over me. I answered, my tone professionally neutral. Hello, Serena. She didn't bother with a greeting. Her voice was a strained, high-pitched wire. Elara, thank God you answered. We have a 5-alarm crisis. The Academy just called Mark. They're saying Chloe's tuition payment for this semester just bounced. The grant payment didn't come through. I swiveled my chair slowly to face the window overlooking the museum's courtyard garden. Bounced? That seems unusual. Unusual? It's a catastrophe, she hissed, the whisper meant to convey urgency but edged with performative drama. They said the funding source was withdrawn. Withdrawn. Can you believe the incompetence? Chloe is in the middle of her mid-term rehearsal cycle. If this isn't resolved by the end of the day, they're talking about suspending her from the program. I let a beat of silence pass, listening to her panicked breathing on the line. That sounds stressful for her. Stressful? Elara, this is a disaster. The volume climbed. Mark is useless with this administrative stuff, and I'm swamped with a brand deal negotiation. You're good with paperwork, with systems. You need to call them. Use your official archivist voice. Tell them it's obviously a clerical error and they need to reinstate it immediately. I nearly laughed aloud. It was so quintessentially Serena. Even in a crisis born entirely of their own actions, or rather my reaction to them, her first instinct was to outsource the labor, the emotional burden, to me. The possibility that the money was intentionally gone, that a choice had been made, was a concept her worldview could not compute. In her reality, money was a natural force, like gravity, something she was entitled to orbit within. The idea that someone could control its flow, could deliberately divert it, was an alien and terrifying notion. I can't call them, Serena, I said, my voice flat and even, devoid of the panic she so desperately wanted me to mirror and absorb. I'm not listed as a guardian or a sponsor. They won't discuss a student's financial aid with me. Figure it out, she snapped, the veneer of desperation cracking into pure frustration. Say you're me. I don't know. You're her aunt. Just fix it, Elara. We don't have time for your bureaucratic nonsense. I'm sure the anonymous donor had their reasons, I stated, enunciating each word clearly. Reasons? What possible reasons? She shrieked, incredulous. Chloe is a prodigy. This is clearly some jealous minor administrator at the academy trying to sabotage her. Probably some dried-up old hag who saw her live stream over the weekend and got envious of her youth, her talent. The irony was so dense it felt like a physical substance in the air of my quiet office. She was, in her own twisted way, right. It was about the live stream. Not out of envy, but as evidence. She had broadcast their fundamental character, their cruelty, their entitlement, their profound disrespect, to the one audience member who actually mattered, the silent patron. I can't help you, I repeated, my finality as solid as stone. You'll have to handle this one yourselves. I ended the call before her next scream could fully form. I set my phone to Do Not Disturb and placed its screen down in my desk drawer. The quiet of the archives descended again, but it was now charged with a new energy. It was the quiet of the eye of a storm I had set in motion. They were speeding toward the unyielding wall of reality, and for the very first time, I had removed every cushion, every safety net I had ever placed between them and the consequences of their lives. The denial phase, as I had anticipated, lasted precisely 48 hours. By Wednesday, it had curdled into a toxic, public victimhood. Serena posted a meticulously filtered video to her Instagram stories. She'd applied a black and white effect, her eyes glistening with manufactured tears. "You guys," she whispered, her voice trembling with practiced fragility. "I am literally shaking right now. We're being sabotaged. Toxic, jealous people in our own family are trying to destroy Chloe's future. They've manipulated the system at her school. It's so devastating when people can't stand to see a beautiful, talented young woman shine." I watched it on my lunch break, a cold pit of disgust forming in my stomach. She wasn't seeking help or solutions. She was weaponizing her audience, mining for sympathy and validation, turning her daughter's impending consequence into content. Then, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Chloe herself. Chloe Aunt Alara Mom says you are being weird and won't help. Whatever. I need a new cello bow for the winter showcase. The one I have is mid. Since you're being difficult about the school thing, you owe me. That bracelet was crusty, but I saw a Cartier love bracelet online. Get me that and we're cool. I stared at the words on the screen. We're cool. She had, in the span of a few days, broken an irreplaceable heirloom, lost a full-ride scholarship to her dream school, and her conclusion was that I was in her debt. The audacity wasn't just stunning, it was a complete philosophical framework. Entitlement wasn't a flaw in her character, it was her character. I did not reply. Instead, I opened a new document on my secure work computer. I typed a formal letterhead addressed to the Board of Directors of the Aurelian Arts Academy. I was not writing merely as a disgruntled donor. My professional authority as the lead archivist who had spent the last 5 years painstakingly restoring and cataloging the original scores and personal correspondence of the Academy's founder, Maestro Emile Valerius, gave my words a weight far beyond a financial complaint. I was a guardian of their institutional soul. My email was precise, cold, and unassailable. I detailed the terms of the Chloe R. Artistic Merit Grant. I quoted the clause in the donor agreement regarding ethical conduct and respect for the cultural and historical legacy which the Academy is founded upon. In the body of the email, I did not write a rant. I wrote a curator's report. I attached 2 photographs side by side. On the left, the broken platinum bracelet on a velvet cloth. On the right, a scanned page from a handwritten letter in Maestro Valerius's distinctive script from my personal archive, addressed to my grandmother, Cora. It thanked her for her unfailing courage that preserved the music. It has come to my attention, I wrote, that the beneficiary of this grant has demonstrated a flagrant and public contempt for the very history this institution is built to honor and preserve. The willful destruction of a personal artifact directly linked to the founder's legacy, for the purpose of social media engagement, constitutes a fundamental violation of the grant's spirit. Therefore, I am exercising my contractual right to permanently revoke all funding, effective immediately. This decision is final. I hit send. The reply from the chairman of the board arrived in under 10 minutes. Dear Ms. Bell, we are appalled and deeply apologetic. We had no knowledge of this connection or this act. The grant revocation is processed. Furthermore, Ms. R.'s continued enrollment at the Academy will be reviewed by our disciplinary committee pending a formal hearing. Thank you for your invaluable service to our heritage. I closed my laptop. The shift was absolute. I was no longer the aunt, laboring invisibly. I was the archivist. And an archivist's duty is not just to preserve, but to authenticate, to contextualize, and, when necessary, to record the moment of collapse. The jeweler's workshop was not in a gleaming mall, but tucked down a cobbled lane in the historic district, behind an unmarked oak door that buzzed open after I stated my name. The air inside was a unique blend of metal dust, polishing rouge, and deep, concentrated silence. Mr. Thorne, A man whose face was a roadmap of wrinkles earned from 60 years of peering into the hearts of gemstones, adjusted his loop as I laid the velvet pouch on his workbench and spilled out the remains of the bracelet. "Platinum," he murmured, his voice like rustling parchment. "Late Art Deco. Superb craftsmanship. The mill-grain detailing here, you don't see this patience anymore." He picked up the two main pieces with a pair of delicate tweezers, his movements reverent. Then he found the sheared safety chain. He held it under the bright beam of his examination lamp, turning it slowly. His breath hitched, a soft, sharp intake. "This wasn't an accident, Miss Bell," he said, looking at me over the rim of his glasses, his eyes clear and grave. "This was an act of considerable force. A deliberate pull." "I know," I said, my voice quiet in the hushed room. He hummed, returning his attention to the main band. He tilted it, studying the interior curve. He went preternaturally still. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the ventilation system. Then, he slowly lowered the bracelet and removed his loop, his hands trembling slightly. "Miss Bell," he began, his tone shifting from assessor to confessor. "The provenance of this piece. Do you know it?" "It was my grandmother Cora's," I replied. "She told me it was special, but she was never one for long stories. She just said to keep it safe." He beckoned me closer. "Look, here." He handed me the loop and positioned the bracelet under the light. I peered through the magnifying lens. There, etched in script so fine it was nearly invisible, was an inscription, "For Cora, who saved the symphony. EV 1947. My blood seemed to freeze in my veins. EV Emile Valerius. The founder. The genius. The man whose lost sonatas I had pieced together from fragments, whose legacy I had dedicated my professional life to preserving. The man whose name was etched in gold above the entrance to the academy currently expelling Chloe. "Your grandmother," Mr. Thorne said softly, with a reverence I'd only ever heard him use for museum pieces, "was Cora Bell. During the war, she wasn't just a friend to Valerius. She was a courier. She smuggled his compositions, his life's work, out of occupied territory in the lining of her coat. He had this bracelet made for her when they were both safe in London. It's not merely jewelry, Ms. Bell. This is a historical artifact. It belongs in a collection." I stared at the shattered metal on the velvet. The horrific, poetic irony of it all threatened to steal the air from the room. Chloe, in her vain, shallow quest for digital validation, hadn't just broken a family heirloom. She had desecrated a primary source document of cultural survival. She claimed to live for music, to breathe for art, yet she had literally snapped a tangible link to the man who built the very temple in which she worshipped her own reflection. All because it didn't look shiny enough on camera. "Can it be repaired?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady, but also sharper, honed to a single, purposeful point. Before this moment, my decision had felt like personal justice, a reclamation of my own power. Now it felt like a solemn duty, a duty to history, to memory, to the very concept of value that Chloe and her parents so utterly rejected. She didn't just lack gratitude. She lacked the fundamental reverence required to be a true custodian of art. She was a vandal in the sanctuary. My phone, turned back on, showed 23 missed calls from Mark and a flurry of texts from Serena. The latest reading. "We're coming over. We need to talk. This is beyond." I didn't reply. I didn't need to talk. I carried the confirmed truth in my mind now, an artifact more durable than platinum. And truth, as any archivist knows, has a relentless, gravitational pull. Fiction cannot orbit it forever. The confrontation arrived as the last dull gold of sunset bled from the sky. The pounding on my door wasn't a knock, it was a sustained, panicked drumbeat. Through the peephole, I saw them. Mark, red-faced and disheveled, Serena, her makeup a smudged mask of distress, and Chloe, slouching behind them with plugged-in earbuds, a portrait of aggrieved boredom. I opened the door but filled the frame, not stepping aside.
"Can I help you?" I asked.
"Help us," Mark exploded, pushing past me into the apartment. "Elara, what the hell have you done?"
"We got an email.
We have 48 hours to come up with $55,000 or she's expelled." "Not suspended, expelled." Serena rushed in after him, her voice a wobbling shriek. "They said the donor permanently withdrew funding due to a severe ethical violation."
"An ethical violation? Chloe."
"They're saying she lacks character."
"You have to lend us the money."
"Just until the refinance on the house goes through." Chloe slouched onto my sofa, not bothering to remove her shoes.
"This is so cringe. I didn't even do anything. The school is just being toxic."
I observed the trio, the raw panic, the towering presumption, the breathtaking lack of self-awareness. They still believed this was a financial transaction they could renegotiate. "I can't lend you the money," I stated, closing the door softly.
"Of course you can,"
Mark roared, throwing his hands up.
"You live on nothing. You have savings.
We're family, Elara. You can't destroy your own niece's future over some administrative misunderstanding."
"It's not a misunderstanding," I said calmly.
I walked to my desk, picked up a single sheet of paper, the formal withdrawal confirmation from the Academy's board.
I handed it to Mark.
"What is this?" he grumbled, snatching it.
"Read the signature line."
His eyes scanned the page, down to the bottom. His face, flushed with anger, drained to a sickly parchment white.
His jaw went slack. He looked from the paper to me, his eyes wide with incomprehension.
He tried to speak, but only a choked sound came out.
He thrust the paper at Serena. She read it. Her hand flew to her mouth.
"Donor signature, Elara Bell," she whispered, the words sounding foreign on her tongue. She looked up, her eyes hollow.
"You?"
"For 3 years. It was you. $165,000, I said.
"Anonymous. Why?"
Mark finally managed, the word a broken thing.
"Why wouldn't you tell us?"
"So the achievement could feel like hers," I said, looking at Chloe, who had finally pulled out an earbud, frowning. "And because I knew, with absolute certainty, that if you understood the source, you'd treat it exactly as you've treated every other thing I've ever given you, as an entitlement.
A limitless tap. Expected, and therefore invisible."
Serena sank onto the arm of the sofa as if her legs had failed.
"But you stopped it. Because of the bracelet."
"Not because of the bracelet," I said, my voice low and clear, cutting through the charged atmosphere.
"Because of the contempt that drove the act."
"Because you stood there, both of you, and watched your daughter destroy something precious for a few laughs from strangers, and you didn't teach her.
You didn't correct her. You didn't even make her apologize."
Chloe rolled her eyes, the defiant mask firmly back in place. "God, Aunt Elara, it was a stupid old bangle."
"Get over it already. It's not that deep."
"It wasn't a bangle, Chloe," I said, and my voice changed. It wasn't loud, but it carried the final, unassailable weight of recorded history. It was my archivist's voice. It was a gift from Maestro Emile Valerius to my grandmother in 1947.
He called her the savior of his music.
When you snapped that chain, you didn't just break a piece of jewelry. You severed a direct, physical lineage to the founder of the Aurelian Arts Academy. You vandalized his personal history.
The very history your school was built upon.
The name Emile Valerius hung in the air of my quiet apartment like a struck gong.
Even Chloe knew its weight.
It was on her acceptance letter, on the concert hall, on the diplomas she'd dreamed of. Her face, for the first time, showed a crack in the petulant armor. Confusion flickered, then a dawning, horrifying comprehension. You knew,"
she breathed, her voice small. I'm an archivist, I said, holding her gaze. Knowing is my profession.
And protecting that legacy from those who would cheapen it or destroy it, that is my duty.
The silence that followed was absolute and profound. The axis of our world had not just tilted, it had been permanently, irrevocably reversed. They were no longer the glamorous family condescending to visit their drab, poor relative. They were supplicants in the presence of a curator who held the authentic deed to everything they had pretended to own. They were standing in a museum of their own making, and the exhibit was titled, Consequences. Serena broke first, with ugly, wrenching sobs that held no camera-ready grace. Mark followed, his anger dissolving into frantic, shame-filled pleas. They offered promises, repayment plans, guilt. Chloe just stared at the floor, the reality finally too large to scroll past. I listened, but I did not bend. I explained that this was not punishment, but the withdrawal of a subsidy that had allowed a destructive fantasy to flourish. I told them that talent without integrity builds a hollow house, beautiful from the outside but collapsing from within from the very first day. When they left, there was no dramatic slam, only the hollow sound of the door clicking shut and their defeated footsteps fading away. 3 weeks later, I collected the bracelet. Mr. Thorne's work was masterful. It was whole, wearable, but the thin, gleaming seam of platinum along the break was clearly visible, a permanent scar, a memory in metal. I put it on. It felt different. Not as a burden, but as a testament. Chloe was withdrawn from Aurelian. She now attends the public high school, where she plays cello in the orchestra. I heard through the brittle family grapevine she sold her $3,000 bow to pay for a new phone screen. It's a start. I sit now in my quiet apartment, the scarred bracelet cool on my wrist, the archival boxes standing sentinel around me. My phone is silent. My bank account is my own. The invisible chain is gone, not broken by them, but unlocked by me. I am not the funding aunt, the family ghostwriter, the silent savior. I am Alara. And the silence around me is no longer an emptiness waiting to be filled with their noise. It is a full, rich, and deeply earned peace. If this story of reclaiming your narrative resonated with you, please show your support. A like on this video tells the algorithm that these kinds of deep, transformative stories matter. Subscribing to Winds of Thought ensures you don't miss our next journey into the hidden battles that define us. And if you've ever had to make a hard choice to protect your own peace, share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be the permission someone else needs to hear. Thank you for watching, and for being part of this community.